Hello everyone, I am Fu Hongxi in Beijing, China. I am a composer and associate professor in composition at the Central Conservatory of Music, CCOM, in Beijing. I teach composition and music analysis at CCOM. Have you ever seen or heard the Chinese traditional instruments from some films, TV shows, or concerts? I guess you must be very curious about them. Do you remember the Chinese performer played guqin, which is a plucked 7-string Chinese music instrument, at the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games in Beijing in 2008? Chinese traditional instruments have both thousands years of history and present a brand new development nowadays. Through the contemporary compositions of the modern Chinese composers. I studied the compositions at the West Coast and Toronto, Canada for 6 years, respectively received the master's and doctoral degrees in 2005 and 2009. I visited the Columbia University in New York City in USA as a visiting scholar from 2015 to 2017. I was invited to give lectures on my compositions at Columbia University, Manhattan School of Music, Ithaca College, University of Toronto, Canada, Canadian Music Center, and so on. I noticed that the foreign composers, musicians, scholars, and composition students are more and more interested in knowing Chinese traditional instruments and the contemporary repertoire of Chinese traditional instruments. I remember I gave a lecture on my composition, which consists of Chinese instruments according to their requirements at Ithaca College in the beginning of 2017 in the USA. As a composer with a multicultural life and learning background, Chinese music is my mother language, rootstock language, and Western music is my father language, spooling language. Researching and understanding these two streams of music and culture, East and West, combining their essences into my music, while each enriching and deepening the development of contemporary Chinese music, contributes to the expansion of the music library of contemporary Chinese music. The power lies in the work I have contemplating and practicing. In addition to learning Western traditional and modern music theory and techniques, I have conducted in-depth analysis and research of Chinese music. And from this rich resource base, I have created a fusion of East and West musical characteristics. I believe not only myself, but also numerous modern Chinese composers, generation by generation, have tried their best to achieve this goal. Chinese music is colorful and profound. The new century musical talents, with their global perspectives, need the knowledge to engage the ears of the West, as well as having a truly international artistic concept of Chinese for the West. Promoting national art and culture is an irresistible responsibility for our generation of music workers. At the same time, it is imperative to formulate the characteristics of our national music, form a logical music theory, establish our own music creation system, and accumulate and enrich our contemporary Chinese library. Chinese contemporary composers, with their invention, creation, and fertile imagination, as well as their rich sense of fantasy, composed plenty of musical works in terms of different genres, instrumentation, styles, and instrumental combination in various levels and dimensions. Chinese traditional art and music, including folk music, national opera music, ethnic groups music, storytelling or story singing music, and so on, are an invaluable treasure and the source of inspiration. Harmony in diversity is one of the main characteristics of Chinese traditional orchestra. Almost every Chinese traditional instrument has very strong characters. How to keep the character of the instrument and explore their potentiality, as well as create a new sound? Well, you may discover the various explorations through the following contemporary compositions of modern Chinese composers. These compositions like a multifaceted prism, which reflects the integration, creative ideas, thinking, efforts, goals, and their researching and understanding of the roots of Chinese art and music by contemporary Chinese composers. Meanwhile, these musical works are similar to the colorful plants and flowers in all shapes and sizes, which come from the same source and roots. Various instrumentations and instrumental combinations, including solo, chamber ensemble for Chinese instruments, chamber ensemble for Chinese and Western mixed instruments. Concerto for solo Chinese traditional instrument and Western orchestra, etc. Many a time we beckoned until she made her appearance. With the pipa in her arms, her face was half hidden. Adjusting the pegs and caressing the strings, a couple of notes she plucked. Though not even a tune, her mood was spoken. Each chord strikes a pensive note, as if voicing the disillusion of a lifetime. Her head is bent, her fingers stray over the strings, pouring out the infinite sorrows of her heart. Lightly her finger pressed and slide, slowly stroked and twined loud. First played her the Nishan, followed by the Liu Yao. The bold strings rattle like pelting rain. The fine ones hummed like soft whispers, pattering and whispering interwove, as pearls big and small, frolicking on a jade platter, like pearls large and small, cascading on a jade platter. Quoted above from Song of the Pipa Player, a renowned Chinese long narrative poem written by the Tang poet Bai Juyi. The description of this poem about the playing techniques and the resulting timbres revealed the many aspects of the auditory characters of the instrument. For example, Dao's lies in music texture and has faint or solid timbral qualities, subtle ornamentations of overtones, sliding notes, shift between tonal sound and noisy sound, kaleidoscopic variations of duration, dynamics, and articulation in the realization of every single sound, the aggregation of which makes up the monophonic melody with subtle and rich change in timbre and texture. Now, I would like to share some pieces which written for Chinese traditional instruments. First, I begin with pipa. Pipa is the name of the instrument. Also, these two words mean the basic playing techniques of pipa. For example, pi means basic right hand playing techniques. Down stroke with index finger. Pa means up stroke with thumb. The first piece I want to share with you about the pipa is a pipa solo written by Liu Dehai. He was the maestro pipa virtuoso in China. The title of this pipa solo work is Terracotta Valses. It is pipa solo work, was written in 1985. Terracotta Valses and Horses of Qin Shi Huang, known as the eighth wonder of the world, shocked the heart of every Chinese descendant, and it is the soul of the Chinese nation sought by Chinese artists. Liu Dehai was a thinker, musician, performer, and composer in pipa. In this piece, he innovated and explored the playing techniques of pipa. He wrote dozens of pipa works, highlight the use of new pipa techniques. His pipa pieces could be divided into chapters, including chapter of life, chapter of pastoral, chapter of religions, chapter of local customers, chapter of nostalgia. He also created the Golden Triangle theory. His creation and compositions was influenced by Zen Buddhism and Taoism. Tao begets one, two lives three, three lives all things. Liu Dehai also believed the innovation of performance techniques is the innovation of performance concept. In Terracotta Valses for pipa solo, Liu Dehai employed the various innovated playing techniques and advanced playing techniques of pipa. For example, half-pressed or off-fret twisting strings. It is also the left-hand playing techniques. Twisting strings is a technique often used in pipa traditional military tunes. The method is to twist two or more adjacent strings and stick them on the fret to make sound. It is often used to show scenes such as weapon sound and horse screaming. The off-fret twisting string is to hang the fingers in the air after the strings are twisted. In addition to the original sound of the twisted strings, the sound of the finger flash is added. The next advanced playing techniques is contrary to off-fret twisting. After twisting the strings are tightly attached to the fret, causing it to make a hard mantle-like sound. We can see the example from the opening of this piece. Twisted high and low strings is the third playing technique in this piece. The first and second strings, the third and fourth strings are twisted into two sets in order to highlight the contrast of high and low sounds. Harmonics, including natural harmonics, artificial harmonics, were invented in 1960s in pipa playing techniques. High-pitched harmonics in phase positions, playing with a strong force, the sound effect is harder and colder, and the tone is like the cold light of a sword. Compound artificial harmonics, also called artificial octave overtones, means that as created by higher octave overtone and lower octave overtone. The next playing techniques is about another kind of overtones. The overtones with the same pitch and changing playing point. The left hand pressing the string is always the same, and the right hand changing the overtone point, producing full overtones with different pitches, octave, 12ths, 15ths, and 18ths. The timbre effect is rich in color, and the remaining sound is long. False overtones, it is one of the playing techniques of overtone he used in this piece. Press the little finger against the root of the string and play high-pitched overtones. The tone is not very bright, slightly dim color, like a bronze weapon with nostalgia. Place little fingernail on the string while playing with the other fingers of your right hand. The timbre is a little bit faint, and its timbre is similar to Xinjiang plucked musical instrument, reverb. The terracotta vase uses sponge strips as mute. The percussive effect produced by clapping the board of pipa. In this piece, use 5 fingers or fingertips of the right hand to quickly clap the board as if the sound of the footsteps. The next piece I would like to share is called Pipa Words. It is also a pipa solo work composed by Professor Qin Wenchen. He is the renowned composer in China. He is currently the vice president of the Central Conservatory of Music. Pipa Words was written in 2006. The composer uses brand new way and perspective to show the energy and potential of pipa. and strives to seek a development and a change of timbre and sound itself, and then show the pure beauty of pipa music. Through the change of overtones and the regular sound of pipa, the combination of faint and solid sound to construct the overall structure of this piece. The use of overtones, for example, dyad, 3-note, 4-note, overlapping to create the harmonies of overtones, to enrich the expression of overtone. Also, use the musical clusters to explore the potentiality of pipa as a multi-voice instrument. Although it is a solo pipa work, the composer attempts to produce the atmosphere like a symphonic orchestra. The use of traditional Chinese number sequence structure, such as the rhythm number sequence principle of Sunan wind percussion music. 余和八. The time and space structure of music constructs a superposed three-dimensional space, time, that gradually increase and decrease structure. The dynamic range is subtle and changeable. Each musical tone of each movement has dynamic changes, which consists of dynamic changes of phrases and segments at sentence level and the paragraph level. It has both the characteristics of pipa 文曲 and 舞曲, we also called literary tunes and military tunes. In 2003, German Freiburg Percussion Group commissioned Chinese composer Professor Jia Guoping to compose a new piece for pipa and for percussionists, titled Broken Shadows. Professor Jia Guoping teaches at the Central Conservatory of Music. He studied with Helmut Lachmann in Germany for 4 years. This piece, Broken Shadows, it premiered at the Marco Polo Festival in Freiburg, Germany. Pipa virtuoso Lan Weiwei plays this piece at that time. In 2006, I first heard this piece performed by pipa virtuoso Lan Weiwei and new music concerts in Toronto, Canada, at the Glen Gord Music Center. It was very impressive work. The compositional idea is very smart. The main idea of composer in this piece is deconstruction and reshaping the tradition materials. This idea inspired by serial music, like a matrix. All materials derived from the traditional pipa repertoire, and the composer cut the materials of traditional pipa repertoire into music fragments. The personality and style of original pipa musical language is eliminated, so that the fragmented musical language can be organically synthesized, forming a unity in musical style and expressing the musical style and the musical thinking of composer. Reciting, pushing, and pulling songs are unique characteristic vocabulary of pipa. It is also the independent musical materials to create the sound of pipa in this piece. Okay. composer explored every detailed sound and fingering playing technique, conveyed by reciting, rubbing, pushing, and pulling, has become the main component of the emotional expression of the music. Also in this piece, use many glissando playing techniques, except for one new technique by glissando with card, develop the timbre expressiveness of each finger technique of the pipa, and expand the emotional appeal of the tone itself. Except for the card glissando, which is a new technique, the other glissandi are traditional playing techniques. This work basically uses all natural harmonics. The composer tried to extract many musical materials from several traditional pipa repertoire and use them as music material for composing this piece. Each segment is a sound with a certain typical meaning and is associated with certain way of playing and articulation. The whole piece is divided into 9 sections. The odd number sections, such as 1, 3rd, 5th, 7th, and 9th sections, show the structural relationship with traditional Chinese music structures. The 2nd, 4th, 6th, and 8th sections have basically the same tempo, number of measures, and playing inserted into the odd number sections to break the traditional structural layout, and at the same time forced a unified whole piece. The overall structure is constructed with the dual numeral structures. In this piece, the composer emphasizes on the timbre. The conception of this work is unique, and the logic of this piece is meticulous. Pipa Concerto Spring and Autumn is a commissioned work composed by Chinese composer Tang Jianping for the concert called Ode to the Thousand Autumn, organized by the International Confucius Association to celebrate the birth of Confucius in 2545, composed in July 1994. On October 7th of the same year, it was premiered by the Central Chinese Traditional Orchestra at the Beijing Concert Hall. The soloist is Wu Yuxia, a pipa virtuoso. The Pipa Concerto Spring and Autumn was inspired by drawing on Confucius' music thoughts. The composer has fully considered drums, chimes, bells setting in the orchestra, because the timbre and the sound of these musical instruments that were widely used at that time, such as chimes, we called it qing or bianzhong. The sound could recall the memory and imagination of culture in a specific historical period. Drum has become a kind of national spirit and life in the process of Chinese historical development, symbol of vitality. So the composer uses it at the beginning and the end of the work. The sound of the drum, for example, the beginning of the concerto uses a sight-inspiring drum sounds, perfect fifths, major sevenths, major seconds, minor seconds, and augmented fourths. These intervals were used in this piece to create the unique style of Professor Tang Jianping's music. The works also quote Guqin music that presents the spirit of ancient Chinese scholars. Musical fragments come from plum blossoms are used to express Confucius' spiritual character and ideal world. The composer also got inspiration from Jiangnan Tanci. It is speaking and chanting music in south of China. It is also one of kinds of folk music in this concerto. It is a very beautiful and delicate narrative tones. Also create one of characteristics of this music. This single movement concerto used the Western classical musical structure. The tempo structure is fast, slow, fast. From the beginning to the end, the composer seeks for the consonants from the dissonant sonority of the overall sound of the orchestra. The composer uses strong contrast to develop the music. I completed my study in Canada and moved back to Beijing, as well as began my new life at the end of 2009. In 2011, I composed a brand new piece called Retain for voices of Dong ethnic group and mixed ensemble. The instrumentation of this piece includes voices of Dong ethnic group, a kind of Chinese a cappella, bamboo flute, sheng, pipa, clarinet, percussion, violin, viola, and cello. The playing techniques of all Chinese instruments used in this piece echo and imitate the sound of the instruments in Dong ethnic group. Retain, where does the heart go? Everyone is looking for the soul of paradise. Where is exactly the soul of paradise? The explosion of information, the investment and operation of big capital, the soul of the paradise has not drifted to infinity, but has been traced back to the origins of language, culture, history, faith, mountains, and rivers, retaining to the most traditional and the most simple flowing water and households. Dong people way of life, Dong people's music, especially the Dong song, is growing in the soul of the paradise, rooted in the traditional culture and historical soul of a towering old trees. It stems from nature into the natural, pure, and ethereal, fresh and beautiful, relaxed, heavy energy like the sounds of nature. The creative theme of Retain is to explore and deepen the intrinsic relationship between musical expression, nature, and human emotion, which is trying to create a literary lyric poem in the language of music. The instrumentation of Retain consists of Dong nationality folk songs, 5 folk songs, including wind instruments and plucked instruments, and Western musical instruments, including woodwind instrument and string instruments. The selection of timbre, the use of performing techniques, key, tonality, interval structure, high and low registers, melody variation, writing techniques in the ensemble are mainly derived from the original Dong ethnic songs. This piece consists of introduction, continuous 4 sections, and coda, each of which presents a picture of the life of Dong people. Frames and frames are linked together to become a vivid chain of paintings. The entire work inherits the spirit and essence of the original music of Dong nationality with a modern perception and flavor, and fully processes the influence of the nature to human mind, as well as the sincere yearning and nature of human being. Li Jiti, a prominent and senior professor at CCOM, published a review entitled Impression of Fu Hongxi's Chamber Music Concert on People's Music magazine. From the perspective of development of modern chamber music in China, Xi's efforts to absorb living, singing, original folk song in her own creation through the juxtaposition of different genres of folk songs and alteration between songs and instruments with modern compositional technique is really a precious exploration, which also contains many major breakthroughs. Li argued and added that I hope everyone will cherish these personal experiences gained in experimental writing, because any kind of reform or the birth of a new thing needs to go through a period of practice and refining to gradually mature. Music Weekly also published a comment of Tang Ruofu, a famous music critic, on this concert. He said, "The final work, Retain, with the help of songs of Dong minority and the looming sound of orchestra, which serves as accompaniment in the background, reflects a fact that composer's style, retaining back to the ethnics and it is very useful and effective to do in that way. Moreover, songs of Dong minority has been added some characteristics of minimalism under the intrusion of conductor Changning Chen, who fully arouses the enthusiasm of orchestra and always pays attention to times for singers to take a breath. At last, Tang pointed out that composer Shi excels at expressing simplicity by using sophisticated techniques and complex structure, and at dealing with details so that her works are featured by delicacy, exquisiteness, and interest. Improvisation, collective ad libitum, compositional techniques are also employed in this piece. The next piece is titled Shadow of the Sun. It is the fourth one of the Shadow of the Sun series. Written in 2000, composer Qin Wenchen employed a sound experiment. 古筝 used as a voice body. The work deliberately avoids the traditional acoustic properties and aesthetic characteristics. The work is divided into 5 sections. Each section has its own playing techniques and timbral presentation. For example, plucking, pulling strings, bowling strings, strumming strings, scratching with coins, etc. The tuning of 古筝 designed by the composer remains the characteristics of the pentatonic scale. The music is poetic, implicit, and at the same time dramatic way of expression. Timbre is the dominant factor in this piece. This piece also recalls the sound, folk tunes, and natural songs of composer's childhood in Inner Mongolia. Composer Qin Wenchen focuses on some unique musical flavors and timbres to express his musical ideas and compositional thinking, such as Mongolia long tunes. Self-singing series 2 for 13-string Japanese koto, commissioned by Japanese koto virtuoso, was written in 2000. It is inspired by Dunhuang painting called Music Without Singing. As you know, 古筝 has 21 strings, but the Japanese koto has 13 strings. Why composer Tang Jianping chose Japanese koto as the solo instrument in this piece? It expresses the bold innovation and innovative spirit of the composer. Because in the Dunhuang painting, the shape and the design of the pipa is very similar to Japanese koto. 古筝 originated in Qin Kingdom in China. During Tang Dynasty, 古筝 became a very common, popular instrument. It was introduced to Japan and gradually evolved into a Japanese musical instrument. 古筝 in Dunhuang's painting is quite different from the modern Chinese instrument, but it's very similar to Japanese koto. It means the Chinese 古筝 and Japanese koto have the same root and the same origin. Composer Tang Jianping used unique tuning method. the tuning of Japanese koto produced the unique timbres and non-scale ordering method to produce the musical clusters and sound and macrotones. Blending the sound of zheng and human singing is a bold attempt at the end of this piece. The notation in this piece is unique. It uses non-pitched notation method. Performer only needs to remember the position of the strings and play the notes indicated by the score instead of remembering or looking at the extra pitch notation. The dynamics of the overall piece is rich, precise, and rigorous. Pitches change frequently. Composer also employed the innovative playing method, for example, playing with the left hand and pressing the string with the right hand. Normally, it's on the reverse way, playing the notes with the right hand and pressing the strings with the left hand. This piece employs the non-Western classical musical structure with the complicated rhythms, meters, and various modern compositional techniques. 古筝 Concerto, titled Robe of Clouds, composed by Zhou Yuguo. Zhou Yuguo is the professor at Xi'an Conservatory. This 古筝 Concerto was written in 2004. The music materials come from local Shanxi folk music and opera music. The title comes from Li Bai's The Beautiful Lady Young. The sentences quoted from the poem is, her robe is made of cloud, her face of flowers made. The subject of this piece comes from Bai Juyi's long narrative poem, 长恨歌. This piece is closely related to the local opera music in Shanxi province, for example, qinqiang, using F-sharp and B-flat in the pentatonic scale. He also hints the joy and bitterness of the musical timbre and the color of modes. Erhu is one of the most important bowling instruments in China. Composer Liu Wenjin composed the Great Wall Capriccio in 1981. There are 4 movements of this piece, incorporating music elements of Chinese folk songs, folk art, and Chinese operas. Normally in Erhu music, we use pentatonic scales, and in this piece in 1980s, composer creatively used chromatic scales. The folk music materials are fully used in Liu Wenjin's Great Wall Capriccio. This piece focuses on the audible effects of Peking opera. For example, in the first and second movements, musical materials derived from the tunes of Black Head, one of tunes of Peking opera. The opera singing kind of music is integrated into the performance technique of Erhu music. Composers also uses the tunes and melodic characteristics from Jingyun Dagu, which is singing and speaking folk music in Beijing. The third movement also incorporates and influenced by Chinese operas and percussive music. In the final movement, the traditional musical materials are integrated. For example, the rhythms of Peking opera, we call it 舵板. It's a fast percussive patterns and some characteristics of Guqin music and traditional Chinese materials into this piece, into Erhu's performance. In 1980s, composer Wang Jianmin in Nanjing also composed a concerto for Erhu titled First Erhu Recipe. It constructs by the ideas of compound ternary form and roundel form. The musical materials of this work comes from folk songs in Yunnan and Guizhou provinces. The composer establishes an artificial scale by major third cycle. The idea comes from the limited modes of transposition by France's contemporary composer Olivier Messiaen. The compound meter and the changeable meter are also used in this piece. It is very interesting. In this piece, composer does not quote any folk tunes or folk songs, but integrates the characteristics of folk songs into his creation. The compositional idea is novel, meanwhile maintaining the unique characteristic of Erhu, for example, melody. The music scene is colorful. Folk music materials are integrated into the artificial scales created by the composer. The sound and the style and the musical materials of this piece reminds the ethnic group music in Yunnan province. The Erhu Concerto Totem in 2016 is used to show the people's worship of the totem in the hearts of the people in southwest of China. Based on D and A pitches, these two pitches are also the tuning tones of Erhu. It presents the unique regional culture of southwest China to the audience. Like a Hungarian composer Bela Bartok, composer Li Bingyang uses the symmetry concept in various levels and dimensions of the work. The compositional idea is symmetry in terms of structural, pitch materials, and timbral arrangement. The overall structure is constructed by the timbral arrangement. For example, two main themes consist of tremolo sound by Erhu performance is mysterious, and the perfect fifth bass voice, which is creates two strongly constructing themes. Generally speaking, the whole piece in both macro structure and macro structure are adhering to the symmetrical thinking. The overall structure is arc form. It means in the beginning, the first section is exposition. The third section is the recapitulates of the first section. It is like the echo of the first one. And the middle section is developed. The minimalism idea also used in this piece. Composer established a new aesthetic standard that is seeking changes from invariance. The music is simple, but not simple. The timbre and the texture of Erhu and the bass, the human voice, play an important role in the overall structure of this piece. The use of bass symbolized chanting and chanting in the religion's ceremonies. The religious theme of totem and the primitive atmosphere of the worship ceremony is properly presented. The Rite of Sun, composed by Professor Zhang Zhao, who teaches composition at Minzu University in Beijing, commissioned by Maestro Wang Fujian, artistic director of Shanghai National Chinese Orchestra in 2011. Kuafu, Chasing the Sun, is one of the themes of Chinese mythology. Composer inspired by the music of Yunnan ethnic minorities, using elements of Jino drum dancing music. The overall atmosphere of this piece is mysterious. Composer Zhang Zhao employs the quasi-variation sonata form and uses mixed pentatonic scales and Chinese modes. Music materials emphasizes on the augmented fourth intervals. The meaning of the title and the whole piece relates to heroism and redemption spirit. Advanced playing techniques of erhu was used in this piece. For example, twisted strings with hair and bow, and performs express the burning sensation of sunlight. When it plays in soft dynamics, it's like a breeze blowing breezes. Advanced playing techniques in timpani also was used. For example, use stickers, play the timpani, the shell of timpani, and records the sound of metal weapons in ancient wars. Erhu Concerto, Heart Fragrance, was written in 2005 by Chinese composer Zhao Jiping. Chinese director Zhang Yimou said in 1980s, he is the milestone and the music master in the history of Chinese film music. Zhao Jiping is born in a family of artists in Xi'an. Created in 2005, this erhu concerto commissioned by the Singapore Chinese Orchestra. The music material comes from the soundtrack of the movie, the same title, Heart Fragrance. Heart fragrance is a metaphor for a sincere state of mind in Buddhism, express the awe and thinking about life. The overall piece uses a sonata structural idea. C, E, D are the three motifs in this piece, creating the descending notes. My understanding of this concerto and the film is that no matter what your life is like, never forget to light a heart incense to illuminate and warm you, me, and him. The music flavor is simple, pure, sincere, grateful, bright, and with hopeful forever. The writing of the composer in this piece, erhu, retains to the nature and original flavor. For example, it's melodic and poetic and lyrical. The composer expresses his deep understanding and cultivation of music and life through this music. Every note in this piece seems to symbolize the force of life. The essence of this work is not to show off skills, but to understand life through music. 双雀 for 二胡 and 扬琴, it is duet for these two instruments. Composed in 1984. 谭盾 is the most famous American Chinese composer all over the world. He was born in Hunan. This piece is his one of early works. This piece consists of two parts. The first part uses Yi Shang pentatonic scale. The rhythms come from Peking opera rhythmic patterns. Music from sparse to dance and gradually denser. In 1980s, it is very creative idea because composer Tan Dun, because he promoted, firstly, the timbre to dominant role in erhu music, and both erhu and yangqin played both important role in this duet. Yangqin is not the accompaniment of erhu. Composer uses very novel and unique compositional disposition and compositional way to break the audience's conventional expectations. The dialogue between points and line, overlapping different kinds of rhythms and sonorities and sound effects produced by erhu and yangqin. I guess composer believes everything is spiritual and everyone or every being could have a dialogue. China has 5,000 years and profound and colorful culture tradition. How to rethink our tradition, our culture, our culture roots, and how to use the innovative ideas to create a piece or a work, musical work, especially for Chinese traditional music. I guess this piece would be very important beginning for all Chinese composers to think over about the traditions, musical traditions, and how to use the essences in the regular or irregular instrumentations. This piece maintains the traditional characteristics of, for example, erhu music, and with the innovative playing techniques and compositional thinking to achieve very unique music language. Tan Dun is good at finding innovations and creations from the normal instrumentations and the combinations of Chinese traditional instruments. In 2011, composer Wang Danhong composed a yangqin concerto titled Rhapsody. This piece is a fusion of jazz, rock, Eastern European music, and other musical styles. The music is dynamic and powerful. The motif, like a seed, developed, repeated, and varied in the whole piece in different playing techniques and different combinations of playing methods. In terms of rhythm, syncopation is one of the most important rhythms in this piece. At the same time, tuplets, triplets, quintuplets, sextuplets, increase the fluidity of the music. The rhythms and patterns and meters are rich, and meanwhile the compound meters and varied rhythmic patterns are used in this piece. This piece represents the fusion of rhapsody genre and the jazz style. It also reminds us the Rhapsody in Blue, composed by American composer Gershwin. The first Yangqin concerto, composed by composer Zhang Zhao in 2017. Pangu is the name of one of Chinese mythology figures. He presents the creative god of nature, love, and devotion. Pangu, the title Pangu, also means the wisdom and power to create civilization. Toccata variations and rondo forms construct the overall structure of this piece. Composer uses sonata's syncing structure to construct the whole piece of the three movements. The first movement of the whole piece is dynamic, dramatic, and rhythmic. Composer breaks the rhythms with irregular accents. For example, moved accent from the first beat to the third beat. Composer Zhang Zhao uses the multi-rhythmic patterns, like a rhythmic sculpture, which we could find in the first prelude, Op. 28, number 1, composed by Chopin. The first prelude, Chopin used multi-rhythmic patterns. For example, total 4 layers in this prelude. First layer, second layer, third layer, and the bass line. Each rhythmic patterns has their own accents, and all of them combine together to create a multi-dimensional rhythmic patterns to give very impressive effects. It's similar to the Western instrument, piano, although it's played by the stickers, not by the hands, fingers. But for the textures and the rhythmic patterns, they have something uncommon. So it is very effective to create these multi-dimensional rhythmic patterns. It is also the most prominent musical character in this piece. So in Pangu, the first Yangqin concerto by composer Zhang Zhao, he also uses the repeated notes in his music, especially in the opening of the first movement. It's very effective and powerful. 3-octave repeated C notes are used in the opening of first movement. It recalls the symphonies and the piano sonata music composed by Beethoven and Schubert. Chromatic scales also played by Yangqin player as a soloist. Fantasy of the Journey is written for dulcimer, string orchestra, and percussion. It was performed in the chamber music concert in 2018. In this concert, 5 pieces composed by myself used the mixed ensemble, Western and Chinese instrumentation. Fantasy of the Journey is one of them. Silk Road is like a time tunnel that runs through the past and the present and deepens the future. The music is like a dialogue among these instruments. The whole piece of music depicts the sprouting, calling and imagination of dreams and curiosity and exploration of the unknown world through time and space. After listening to this piece, Italian conductor Claudio Simone commented, "This piece reminded him Liu's aria in Puccini's opera Turandot, Signo Ascolta. There's something in common between the two in music atmosphere and emotional expression. Italy was the end of ancient Silk Road. It was in the West where the Eastern and Western cultures met. The basic idea is fusion in this music." And the fusion creative idea is mainly reflected in the following aspects: the integration of Chinese and Western instruments. Not only use the dulcimer string orchestra and the percussion instruments in the overall instrumentation, but also use the mixture of Chinese and Western instruments such as Peking gong, cymbals, marimba, and vibraphone in this part of the percussion instrumentation. Combination of Chinese and Western compositional techniques. In general, the overall piece adopts a texture of monophonic to multi-voiced and then back to single-voiced, which reflects the characteristics of development of Western music. However, the whole piece is dominated by single line and singing melody, which reflects the characteristics of Chinese music. In terms of melodic development, a combination of Chinese and Western techniques such as symmetry, adding augmentations, and the slowing singing and glissando are used. In addition, music also reflects this characteristic in many aspects such as rhythmic arrangement. Third, the integration of traditional playing techniques and modern advanced playing techniques. From the music score, we can find that the yangqin dulcimer uses its traditional playing techniques to perform the melody. And the string orchestra section play mainly by advanced playing techniques, for example, macrotos, glissando, and chromatic clusters, etc. The whole piece highlights a linear song-like melody. From the use of string instruments to the register selection and the melodic contour of yangqin, all reflect the characteristics of singing with the human voice. It means dulcimer, 扬琴, plays melody, is similar to a singing of human voice. In addition, the composer not only followed the general method of augmentation to the dulcimer in traditional way, but also adopted the technique of adding augmentations, which is inclined the flavor of vocal music. This piece presents two-dimensional creation concept and compositional techniques, the unity and inter-existence in the same musical work. Other kind of plucked Chinese instrument, such as ruan, round-face instrument, 三弦, string plucked instrument, 古琴, a plucked 7-string Chinese musical instrument, Chinese percussion instruments, for example, Chinese bass drum, Chinese tongtongs, Chinese tempo blocks, etc., and sheng, a Chinese mouth-blown free reed instrument consisting of vertical pipes. Many Chinese composers wrote concerti for sheng, Chinese percussion, 古琴, and ruan, for the unique instrumentations such as duet for 古琴 and double bass, titled Free and Unfettered Psalter, is one of my experimental pieces on these combinations. Pipa plays Chinese opera, 3 scenes from the Quinchu, titled Romance of the Western Chamber, is one of explorations of Chinese composer Yao, who teaches at the composition department at CCOM. Recently, I composed a concerto for Sanxian and orchestra, which will be premiered very soon. The earth is flat. Continuous communication, integration, innovation, and development are the future of musical development. I believe that the voice from China must also be the voice that can represent the future of music and art creation. Music is the hope, light, and spiritual comfort at this special moment. Thank you.